Welcome to Wizards of the Tower.
Roleplay.
This episode, we're going to be talking about elves. Welcome to Wizards of the Tower.
Roleplay.
We're here to talk to you today about elves and RPGs.
Yeah. They seem to be pretty popular. A lot of people want to play them. A lot of people want to play in their world. So we thought we'd bring this up and see what everybody else thought about it.
Yeah. My first character was actually an elf.
That's really cool because I thought you had mentioned something about an elven archer.
Yeah, he was an elven fighter, magic user. He was multi-class.
Okay, cool. I don't believe I've ever played an elf in a role-playing game, except Skyrim, where I played a woodland elf. So let's kind of talk about elves and their origin. That they seem to be something that is really popular today, and you see pictures of them everywhere, and sometimes you see they have like these really weird, long, pointy ears, and then, of course, in Lord of the Rings movies, they're like really small, pointy ears and stuff like that. So, let's talk about their origin.
Yeah, so we know that elves originally started off in Scandinavian type lore, and they were typically evil and mischievous, deviant.
Well, they were
also small.
Yeah, they were thought to be really small, lived, hid in the earth somewhere, and they were thought to be responsible for changelings. That being, they would sneak in, replace your child with one of theirs, because they, for some reason, wanted to have human children, but then would leave you one of their children, so you end up raising an elven child that ended up being, just a terrible child, or just a bundle of nuisance. And it was kind of an explanation for why someone would have 3 or 4 kids, and most of their kids would be great, but then there's that one kid that just never amounts to anything and is nothing but trouble, and the whole idea is like, well, I was a changeling, maybe the elves snuck in and dropped the child in.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a Scandinavian folklorish idea. And then it moves up until you get into sort of like popular literature, and I guess one of the first time I ever encountered elves in popular literature was in Tolkien's books.
Yeah, absolutely, in Tolkien, because you have, first of all, The Hobbit, you have Rivendell, and you have Elrond, who was actually half-elf, but he looked elven and lived with the elves and was long-lived like the elves.
See, I never knew Elrond was half-elven. I always thought he was all elven. I didn't realize that until we watched the TV show, The Rings of Power.
Yeah.
And I was like completely stunned that I didn't know that Elrond was half-elf. And for some reason I never picked that up in Tolkien's books either. I don't know. It just came to me all of a sudden.
Yeah. And then of course there's the elves of the woodland, Mirkwood.
The woodland realm, that's big in The Hobbit. You have the king of the woodland realm. And of course Legolas, everybody's favorite elven archer and fighter, ranger even. Well, he's like a combo. I mean, he's like everything. He's a ranger, fighter, with archer based, but he can also fight with 2 hands. He's got those knives. The guy's got a phenomenal dex.
He is the epitome of what a lot of us look at elves and want our elves to be like.
Exactly. And in Tolkien's folklore, the elves are generally considered to be, they're very well thought of generally, but they're also very long lived, and they almost have kind of an angelic presence.
Yeah.
Really, you see them as kind of almost like angels. When you see Galadriel walking down a staircase, it's like she doesn't she just kind of floats everywhere she goes, and she has like lights underneath her dress to make her glow, and there's always like this light in her face, illuminating her eyes, making her glow as she kind of, very ethereally moving back and forth, and seems to speak nothing but wisdom all the time, and even has telepathy. So, and then, of course, the elves, they're moving off to the Grey Havens. They're leaving the world of men because the world of men is, failing in the face of evil, and the world of elves are failing, etc., etc. So that's kind of a popular idea, from Tolkien's books, but also the movies, and of course, the games now and everything else.
Right. In other literature, there are elves in like the Terry Brooks, but the elves are very secretive. In fact, one of the main characters is once again half elf.
Okay.
One of the Shea brothers, who goes off looking for the Sword of Shannara.
I remember that. Yeah.
The Sword of Shannara, the elf stones.
The elf stones, yeah.
And they go off to find the elven community, and the elves are kind of a mutated human race.
They are, and it's interesting because we were watching the Lord of the Rings movies, and Saruman speaks to the Uruk-hai and says, "Do you know where the elves came from? I mean, do you know where the orcs came from?" And he said they were elves once that had been twisted by illness and black magic and that sort of thing. And it kind of explains a lot that if you take elves, they're typically good, but then if you make them evil, they become something else. Orcs, Uruk-hai, twisted evil things. And we'll get to that later on in the show. But there's also other ways that elves have been shown in popular media, and that's, of course, like the TV shows of The Witcher and the games of The Witcher.
Yeah,
and
the books of The Witcher.
Right, and the other games.
Yeah, Sapkowski's elves they were masters of the world that The Witcher is in, and then opened the gate and humans fled through and monsters fled into it, and so the elves became this kind of oppressed people, and now live in hiding. And
yeah, it's not going well for them. If you watch the shows, you can see how bad it is for them. They're a race in decline, obviously, and it's not going well. That's in the Witcher timeline. I don't know much about the Dragon Age timeline because I never played the Dragon Age games.
Well, the Dragon Age there's two kind of elves. There's the elves that are kind of nomadic or gypsy-like and move around, and then you have those which live in the cities, which are oppressed and downtrodden and poor and treated very poorly because the world just looks upon elves as being bad and being lesser, instead of, we'll hit upon this in a little bit, as being higher.
Okay.
They're more of considered a lesser type of race, even though they're like anybody else.
Okay, I've never played Dragon Age, so I'm not really sure about that. I definitely had to ask.
There was the Weissman Hickman book.
Weiss and Hickman, yeah. Elves are evil in that.
Yeah.
Elves enslave humans and dwarves, which made me really uncomfortable reading the books because the elves are so bad. It's kind of like, wow, I'm reading a really terrible book here. Well written, but the story is very terrible.
And then you get into the elves of Warhammer. Now, we're not going to hit much upon them because we don't know that much about them. But, you have more of a higher class elf, and then you have what they call the dark elf, which is the evil elf. And then I think there's another race of elf, but, and in that one, they're kind of an offshoot of the Tolkien-esque, but in those elves, I tend to kind of get more of an arrogancy. Yeah, they're long-lived, I think. I think, again, they're sort of, they're antagonists of humanity because so many of the elves in there are chaos elves, and they're mutated by chaos, and they've done such terrible, terrible things. In the 40K world, Warhammer, the Eldar, the elves have made they've made the change into future space, and they've become the main antagonists. Sort of like part of the antagonists against the Emperor, and that's of course the Eldar. Also, another thing we should talk about, I guess, is Skyrim, which I'm kind of obsessed with Skyrim. I play a lot of it. You have different elves in there. You've got the Altmeri Dominion, which it's a main storyline about what they've done to the Empire and that sort of thing. And, of course, you can play elves. You can play high elves. You can play dark elves. You can play wood elf in Skyrim. So you can play, and they each have different powers and different things that they do. So, elves have been portrayed a lot of different ways in popular media. But we wanted to talk a little bit more about their presentation, typically, how people see them, and maybe in the D&D or role-playing world. Well, you kind of have this, once again, I hit upon it just briefly, the Warhammer elves, they're kind of come across as this arrogant.
Yeah.
or some of them come across as very flippant and jovial, and so you kind of have these different kind of presentations of them. Mm-hmm. And I think the arrogant elf is more the ones that I have seen, because even in the Tolkien world, they come across as kind of an arrogant, that, hey, we're going off to, we're going to leave this world to you, and let you fight your battle, and your war. We fought with you one time, but we're done fighting with you.
I think because they seem to have this sort of characteristic of being kind of an elite race, they come across as being very arrogant, being very pronounced, with a separation from humanity. Dwarves. Now, there's always this antagonist between dwarves and elves, and I just never really understood that. But I think it's just kind of a plot device. Yeah. They're both long-lived, and maybe they just can't stand each other, that kind of thing. And so, typically, what is their behavior then? And they're arrogant. They live off by themselves in their enclaves. When you see them come around, they're, elven wine is the finest wine, and elven weapons are the finest weapons, and their magic is fine magic, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's like their magic is like above and beyond, because when you get into like the boots of Elvenkind and the cloak of Elvenkind and the elven bows, and
I mean it's highly sought after, right? Boots of Elvenkind, right. or a bow of elven manufacture, or a sword, of elven manufacture, supposed to be so well made. And I suppose a lot of that can come from Tolkien, that they're the only creatures who could reforge Narsil and make it into, the sword that could defeat, the armies of the Witch King and all that. That's kind of how people seem to think about them, is that they're highly magic and mysterious sort of race that, it's kind of obscure, and they keep to themselves, and they're sort of arrogant, and they're long-lived, so they kind of look at you as being like a little dumb little puppy in the dirt.
Yeah, warmongering.
And so they're past all that, and so, well, I guess if you did live hundreds and hundreds of years, you'd look at regular people that way. So
then you've got the types of elves. Typically in fantasy RPGs now, I think in the games they've kind of done away with the types of elves. It's just an elf. But you used to have the high elf, you had the wood elf, and of course you had the drow elf,
right?
Which were the dark skin with white hair. And of course, what really made them popular was Drizzt Do'Urden from the R.A. Salvatore books. Streams of Silver, the Halfling's Gem, and God, I don't know. I used to read all those, and now I can't even keep up with it all. But Drizzt was and still is a very popular character. People look upon that, and there was the Homeworld series, which is when it was a prequel where he was back in the Underdark, facing the evil Drow who would turn people into driders if they weren't, following their ways. And
so a drider is a half elf, half spider.
It's a drow spider.
Drow spider creature. Okay. So then you get an example of elven magic there that it's kind of malevolent. Shape changing and evil. One thing we should talk about, and just kind of bring this up briefly because we don't want to get too far into it. They have the concept of like dark elves, and that dark elves are like, because they're darker skinned, they're sort of evil. That's a completely archaic belief system that really people shouldn't bring up anymore.
Yeah.
Really, we should really get rid of that, I think, because it connotates that things that are dark are evil, things that are light are not. And it's an archaic belief system, and I really do believe that we should probably erase that part of it from at least the role-playing game canon, because it just doesn't fit, and it's a relic of an archaic age.
Yeah. Now, in my own world of Edain, I actually have my own races of elves.
Yeah, I know you've come up with a bunch of them. Yeah.
There's what the common folk call the noble elf, which is actually the Tauran. And they live, they're kind of arrogant in their own way. They live in their own cities. Now there are some that live outside of Tarashon, the Elven Kingdom.
Okay.
But they are very secretive. They don't want humans coming in. They don't allow humans in. The half elves that exist in their world are kind of subpar to them.
Okay.
I have what they call the Moor or the Corm, which are the evil. Mm-hmm. We used to call them black, but like I said, moving away from that connotation, black meaning evil, but
black-hearted.
Black-hearted,
not necessarily
right.
Black-skinned, black-hearted,
right.
Which is an old concept that people have a black heart.
Right. So I came up with my own elven language in a lot of ways, and Moor and Corm, which are terms for evil or foul-hearted.
Yeah.
I've got the what would be commonly called a wood elf, that I actually call they're actually more what they call the Tor, which is another name for the forest.
Okay.
And they like to tattoo their faces in patterns in greens and blacks, and that way they blend into the forest.
So
now they like to live out more rural.
Okay.
There are some that live inside the city, but most of them are rural, and they like to hunt and protect the forest. They're the protectorates of the forest.
Okay.
I've got what is commonly called the Desolation Elves. The Desolation Elves are an elven race that lives in the desert. They tend to be cannibalistic to most things because coming across food is kind of tough.
Sure.
And they like to capture things. If they capture anybody, they like to play with it, almost like a cat in a way. They'll let it release and make it feel like it got away and captured again.
Gotcha.
They like to play with it and torment it. And they, like I say, they live in the desert, which is desolate and nothing there. And then I've got what I call the Thorn Elves or Briar Elves, which there's actually another name for them, but they are kind of like the Wild Elves, but their weapons tend to be barbed and very wicked, and their armor tends to look kind of spiky, and they tend to live in briar patches and rose areas where it's very protected. Okay. And they can make those things grow, so they like to take over forests and kind of take over those little areas. Huh. So in my game, no one's ever run into the Thorn Elves yet.
We haven't yet, no. We have run into the Desolation Elves, and they're bad.
Ran into Desolation Elves, you've ran into a couple of more elves.
Yeah, they're bad.
Yeah. So you don't have to stick with those tropes of high, wood, and drow. Yeah. And I don't have drow in my world. That's a trope that I don't like or tend to agree with.
Yeah, okay. I mean, no, I know you've developed these, this kind of complex elven kind of lore and legend for your games.
Yeah. And I would encourage others to do the same.
Yeah, I mean, anybody can do that, so it's one thing that they can do, in your game. So, bringing us up then to playing an elf in D&D. I don't believe I've ever played an elf. I played a dwarf. I played a halfling. I played a gnome. I wanted to play a half-orc. I never got around to playing that character. But I've never played an elf.
Yeah, I've played a few in my life. The first one, like I said, was an elven fighter mage. I was a huge fan of The Lord of the Rings, so instead of calling them Legolas, I called them Egolas.
Yeah. Well, so then in the very first editions of Dungeons & Dragons, elf was a class, right?
Right, under the basic system.
Yeah. So it was like you wouldn't play in an elf invider, you're just playing an elf.
Right. Wherein I was playing first edition, and that was, you could multi-class as an elf. So I think I could be like 9th level fighter, 7th level mage, or something like that. Okay. You were limited on how high you could get in your multi-classing.
Sure, and so there's certain characteristics that draw people to play elves. One of the one I know most about is elves tend to have high dex.
Yeah, in fact, one of the last elves I played, which was quite a few years ago in a campaign, was I was making her multi-class first as a ranger, then as a fighter, and I was switching back and forth. Yeah, and it was a very power gamer game. We've talked about this character before. And she was wicked when it came to the bow and when it came to two-weapon fighting. Yep. So her dex was extremely high. She didn't wear armor. She had a few magical items that buffed her up. So she liked to run around and, in little to nothing, to that way she felt like she wasn't hindered.
No, I understand. I mean, elves have this concept, people that they think of them as being, very dexterous. They have high charisma. They're beautiful. I mean, She could probably pull off running around in a leather bikini because being a tall, lithe, skinny elf probably looked really good. People imagine that in the game and they're probably like, wow, look at this she-elf, man. And even that even comes up in the Hobbit movies.
Yeah.
With
Turiel.
With Turiel, and it's like, where'd that come from? But
yeah,
I mean, that's popular media,
even in the Dragonlance series, there were some elves that kind of ran around like that.
There are, yeah. They're they're highly charismatic, very beautiful. That's part of their charm.
Yeah, whereas their strength tends to be a little bit lower because they tend to be frail. Their bones are smaller and thinner.
Yeah, that kind of thing. But they have low light vision, which makes up for a lot because deep in the elven forest or whatever, it's kind of dark. They can see, and then they also have like a longer life.
Right now, in my world, elves are typically those. Elves and dwarves are those who usually create the magic.
Yeah.
Because I stipulate there's too much magic. People want to just start. Well, I want to make this, and 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 then it floods a game of magic items. So. Right. I make it where it takes a little bit of life out of you, so that way elves and dwarves don't mind because they're so long-lived anyway. Right. It doesn't matter to them.
Yeah, that's one of the things that you have is when you create a magic item, it takes a year of your life.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. I mean, if it's drawing part of your essence,
That's why wizards always look old.
Yeah, I mean, Gandalf, of course, was hundreds and hundreds of years old, if not thousands of years old.
Well, then you get into Elminster of the Forgotten Realms, who looks really ancient and old. And there was... Fizbin, I think his name was, when the Dragonlance. But I think he was actually a god when it came right down to it.
Okay.
So, playing an elf, you've got what comes across as this advantage. You tread lightly and you can see in the dark and you're smaller and
very dexterous.
Yeah, tall and slim, or sometimes in Dungeons and Dragons they actually make them smaller. Well, I tend to look at elves in the Tolkien-esque world where they're taller than humans.
Yeah. But see, elves originally were almost like gnomes. They were smaller.
Yes.
Smaller, creepy little mischievous creatures that would sneak in and that kind of thing. It's almost like, like little hobbits or something, halflings. Elves, typically have this concept where they hold themselves off from society and they have their own little elf civilizations. Yeah. They're enclaves or they have their special forests, and of course that's all over in the Tolkien realm. You have the Woodland realm, you have Lothlorien, you have Rivendell, things like that they have these holds or fastnesses where they stay, and that's where they stayed, and they defend their borders in that sense.
Yeah. And then when they have a city, it's a city within those realms that nobody comes into, or very few people come into.
It's very exclusive, to be a friend of an elf, and you go in there. Sometimes you have to display like a badge like this to show that you're an elven friend and that sort of thing. How in the world... I think a lot of that's got to come from Tolkien.
I think it does.
Because of all the elven exclusivity and everything. And I think it carried on.
Look at Lothlorien. They're trying to go into Lothlorien and they get jumped by all these elves and say, come no further. Well, okay, we'll let you come because you're friends of Gandalf. And
every time, they stop and all of a sudden there's like, spear, arrow, sword. And you're like, these borders are well guarded. Well, apparently the only thing they do in their whole life is sing, drink mysterious liquids from beautiful looking pitchers, and guard their borders.
Yeah.
That's kind of your typical elf right there. Why are elves so attractive to playing in games? Why do people want to play elves so much?
In Pathfinder, I think some of it has to do with maybe their bonuses that they have, and maybe even for Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Just some of the special features they have. Now, in the original first edition of Dungeons and Dragons, you were limited on how high a level you could go in certain things. You could go higher level in, I think it was a mage or a thief. I think thief was pretty much unlimited for anybody. But fighters, you were limited in how high a level class you could get. 7th or 9th level, something like that.
Wow.
I don't know. Once in a while, I like playing an elf. I typically play more humans.
Yeah. I mean, I play humans a lot.
But when I play an elf, I tend to be kind of this arrogant loner type of character.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know, I guess that's just the trope that's built into them.
I think so. I mean, a lot of times people who want to play fighters typically play, or archers play elves, so they can get the bonuses to archery.
Yeah.
Then you get the magic bows, you get the bonuses to dex.
Rangers are great.
Rangers, so they have, woodland stride, leave no trace.
Friendship with animals.
Friendship with animals, all those things that elves are typically supposed to have, they seem to come easier, and, elves are beautiful. They're pretty, and everybody likes to play them because they want to, have high charisma. They're fine. They're, they're kind of, they have this sort of exclusivity about them. That they're like one of those races that hold themselves above everyone. So I think that probably has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
I know that. Once again, I'll bring this up, is when I see a lot of elven pictures and they have like the huge ears that come out.
I think that came from World of Warcraft.
Okay.
Which I can't stand the elf with the big huge ears.
See,
I like the elf that's more like the Spock or Vulcan-like ears.
I've never played World of Warcraft, so I don't know. But I know that if you look up like typical images of elves, they're almost always either male or female. They're really tall, thin, scantily clad, and they have these enormous pointy ears.
And even Pathfinder has gone into that.
Yeah.
Which just... Elves in my world don't look like that. Elves, if somebody drew a picture and had the elf like that, I'd be like, wow, you're kind of goofy looking for an elf.
Yeah. I don't know how you explain that.
That's like having a human with ears out to here,
Dumbo ears.
Dumbo ears.
Yeah. So we'd like to hear from our
viewers.
Our viewers, and let us know what you think about playing elves and why you would like to play them, why you might have elven characters in your game, and how you portray them.
Yeah, elves are there in most RPGs, not just D&D or Pathfinder. They're there in, I believe in Palladium. I think Rollmaster may even have them. Don't quote me on that. Dungeon Crawl Classics, because that's based upon the old first edition.
Yeah.
Shadow Dark, I think they're in there. So, elves are a typical race within the gaming system.
Yeah, and they crop up in so many fantasy books and fantasy lore. And so many worlds that people have. They always have, somebody will write a book, this is book 3 in the 7-book series, Sword of Fire series. And there's elves all over in there. Whether they're good, whether they're bad, whether they help you, whether they're a minor character. It's rare that they're a major character. I think because it's really difficult. People have a difficult time imagining playing them.
Yeah, well, I know there was the other Witcher series. That was the prequels.
Oh yeah, the prequels. Yeah, those were elves.
Those were mainly all elves in that because the humans hadn't come forward.
That's true. So I guess in a sense those would be the main characters in there.
Yeah, and in my own world, elves came about after the dwarves.
Yeah.
And in most games, elves are the elder race who come before the dwarves. Yeah. I just wanted to mix that up, and I gave a little bit of a, this whole dwarves helped create the elves with the help of the giants with this artifact, and so the dwarf will tell you that we created you, and the elf will say, no, you didn't, because the elves look at the big picture. That, that it wasn't without the giants, without the mother, the goddess. Then the dwarves wouldn't have been able to do it. I mean, they look at the big picture.
That's pretty good legend and lore. I mean, it really is. And I'm sure a lot of our viewers have legend and lore like that too. Hopefully they'd like to share a little bit of that.
Yeah, we'd like to hear it. So anyway, I think we're going to end this episode of Wizards of the Tower.
Roleplay. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. Recently heard somebody say that they weren't getting notifications even with a subscription and ringing the bell. The only thing I can suggest if that happens to you would be to unsubscribe, unring the bell, resubscribe, and re-ring the bell, and maybe that'll work. YouTube, That's how it is.
Internet thing. So anyway, thanks, folks.
Thanks, folks.